Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner.
And this is Claire Kaplan. Once again, I want to remind our listeners that sometimes our conversations on this podcast can bring up information that's very difficult to hear and even more difficult for survivors of trauma. So we encourage all of you to be sure to take care of yourselves, whether it's doing the kinds of things that provide comfort to you, getting emotional support from family or friends, a counselor if you have one, or a hotline. And we'll give you the contact information for the Take Back the Night Foundation at the end of the podcast so you can access resources there.
Thank you so much, Claire. And as we do throughout our podcast, we'll ask tons of questions with our fine guest today, Angeline. And we always start, Angeline, kind of understanding your bio, where you grew up, how many siblings you had, if you had nobody, what continent you were on, do you have any degrees, kind of your backstory of like who you are outside of the story that brings you to your microphone. So tell us about your bio.
Sure, absolutely. Yes. So my name is Angeline Constantino, and I was born and raised in the Midwest in Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota. So I was born into a Greek family, and I have one brother, and I actually, went to high school, graduated high school in 1982, and then I went off to college, and I worked in my parents' restaurant business. So the early part of my childhood going into, I worked in my parents' business, right through college, and I had a vision and a dream that I wanted to move to New York. And that was in 1985. And I wanted what was a better life for myself because my uncles and my aunt lived here. And I wanted to be, close to my cousins. And I wanted to leave that type of lifestyle that I was living, which was, in the Midwest. So I took a leap of faith and I jumped on a jet plane and I flew to New York. So
And Angeline, just to clarify two things, having been to the great state of Minnesota many, many times to speak myself, there's the St. Paul's, the Twin Cities.
Yes.
There's there, but then there's also Duluth, and there's also Minnesota's a big place. So whereabouts did you grow up in Minnesota?
Oh, I grew up in southern Minnesota, which was Owatonna, and I was born in Rochester, Minnesota on January 5th.
Let me just tell you, there's a college called Gustavus Adolphus. So if you drive from the Twin Cities south, I think toward where you live, there's a ginormous billboard that says Green Giant. It's a life-size green, a huge billboard. So a lot of our listeners may not know exactly much about Minnesota, but I would think it's helpful for you to describe, there are the Twin Cities, but there's also a lot of unique and cool places around Minnesota. So you were in southern Minnesota and you had how many siblings?
Just one sibling.
Mm-hmm. And are you the older one?
I'm the older one, yes.
And when did you say, New York City, here I am? How old were you?
Okay, that was when I was 21 years of age. So
you went to college there?
Yeah, I went to college. I actually went to the College of St. Thomas, which is now the University of St. Thomas, and that was in St. Paul, Minnesota.
It used to be all men, I believe. Were you there when it was transitioning?
Yes, I was there, yes.
Yeah, I remember having spoken there. It was, it's still pretty, I think they're changing, but it's interesting to think about that you went there. And this was, for our listeners, Angeline is one of those agents of change and her life story. And the year you were there, it was still kind of more probably male dominated.
Yes, male dominated, yes. And I grew up in a Greek family, which was male domination. My dad won't be happy to hear that, but that's...
That's okay. Those fathers of ours, for our listeners, we record pre-show, and today happens to be this thing called Father's Day. So yes. It's funny, Angeline, to hear you reference father, Greek dad, and I'm sure that was a whole side story by itself. But I think it's really helpful for our listeners to hear your upbringing and how you were informed about being a woman and your interactions with men. So we have dad Greek, family Greek, and your other sibling was a boy?
Yes, younger brother.
Younger brother. Did he go to St. Thomas as well?
No, he went to a different college, and then he works in IT, and he worked in IT in St. Louis, and now he is back in Minnesota. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, that's so helpful. And I think one last question I have for you about Greek culture. We've not had anyone on our podcast who's really been able to articulate what that means. How would you, before we launch into your story, I think that's really interesting, and how you went through life and current day Greek culture. Is there any difference? Has it changed? Interestingly, we are working at Take Back the Night on international law and policy around this issue. So, for example, I got up at 3 a.m. to work with Nigeria on their national laws and policies around sexual violence. So cool. We work as globally, and you're another voice of international experience and culture.
That's amazing.
So I think what you could add, something really relevant, is a little bit more understanding for our listeners about your Greek background and what that meant to you as a girl growing up.
Sure, absolutely. So I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, meaning that my parents, we would go to church every single Sunday in the morning. And I attended Sunday school religiously every Sunday. And later on, I became involved in it's called the Young Adult League, and it's abbreviated YAL. So you may be familiar with it. So that was great because I got to, socialize with my peers, and we would take trips. So we would take trips, like to Chicago, where I was just at last week, but we would take, field trips. So we would go on trips to Chicago for the YAL to meet other peers. So my parents were very strict with me since I was the oldest of the family. So they were very strict with me, disciplined, and they, enforced discipline on me, which was good and bad, but, because they firmly believed in the Greek religion. No other, because I am now a Christian. So I still, love the Greek culture, the Greek food. We celebrate Easter, we celebrate Christmas, and we celebrate New Year's. Basically, we celebrate the same holidays as the Americans do. But, the Greeks, they have a different lifestyle. And so fast forward to today, I am going to be planning a trip to Greece in August. So to look for property in Paliophileto, Greece, at Airbnb. So I'm planning to open up an Airbnb so this way I can look forward to doing retreats for women, because in the Greek culture, and I don't know how it is for other cultures, but in the Greek culture, I experienced, unfortunately, domestic violence. And this is, we'll get to that in a minute, but I experienced, not sexual violence, but, like if we were told what to do as children, and if we didn't obey, that was it. So
when you say we, just to clarify, Angeline, are you saying we as women or we as children?
I would say children, and being a young child, a young girl, I would say as a young girl. And then, right up to my teenager years, we were basically told what to do.
Does the same standard apply to the boys?
Actually, no, it doesn't. No.
And I have to say, just as an aside, I have Greek family by way of marriage, and both of my cousin Wang and her sister moved to the United States to marry American men because they couldn't deal with Greek men. So ironically, her daughter is married to a Greek man. She's living in Greece now. I know she raised her not in the Greek Orthodox Church. She married a Jewish guy, and totally into Judaism. And now her daughter's gone back to the, motherland. So it's been a kind of an ironic journey.
Ironic journey. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay. No, I understand where she's coming from. So
yeah. So Angeline, I think we have a cursory glance at Greek culture.
Good.
And a cursory, like a blink of an eye, and you in rural Minnesota, and going off to You went to St. Thomas, then you're done. And at age 21, you're headed to New York City, right?
Right. Correct.
So now what happens? Do you need money? You've got your own money, car, you fly there, you don't need a job. I'm curious about, like, you have a degree in what when you leave St. Thomas?
Well, actually, ironically, I did not finish my degree at St. Thomas. I was into my junior year and I finished, I believe it was, the freshman year, sophomore year, and part of my junior year. And I just decided that I wanted a change of life. I wanted to experience the city. So I made a decision, and, the decision was a little unpopular at first, I do recall. But I remember leaving in a snowstorm. I took the bus to the airport and I was marooned in the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport for 36 hours. So my journey to New York was quite the journey, but I just wanted to get away from I was 21. So I just wanted to escape and experience a different way of life. And I had talked to my uncle, to my mom's brother about it. And he said, fine, just come to New York. And,
it takes a little bit of money to get out of Minnesota.
It does. And I did have the money because I saved it. I saved money.
You paid your own way.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I messed up on how did you go from A to B?
No, that's okay. So I bought my plane ticket and it was my own money. It was my own money that I had saved from working in my parents' business because that's all I was doing at the time. So I saved my own money and I moved to New York in March of 1985. So I packed up 2 suitcases and I lived with my uncle and my aunt at the time in Lynbrook, New York, Long Island. So that is on the Eastern Shore, not on the Eastern Shore, but the South Shore. So I worked in my uncle's diner business. So I was a hostess, and I was also bartending. And I was going to school at the time at Nassau Community College. So I changed majors and I ended up majoring in business administration with a focus on marketing. So during that period of time while I was working, which was actually part-time, and I would work at night and then go to school during the day, there was Greek Orthodox Church in the vicinity of Lynbrook. So I went to church because I wanted to meet people. My aunt said, why don't you just go to church and meet some people? I said, okay. So I went to church and I met some people, and there was, again, this organization called the Young Adult League. So I attended like a couple of meetings there, and there was a guy who was there, and he, we were talking and we became good friends. And I remember we were going out, we went to a coffee shop. We went to like a diner late and, we got something to eat and I was with people, but he was there and he was talking to me about his background in sales, and he had owned a business and advertising, a direct mail business. So that appealed to me. And then he lived on a 37-foot yacht in New Rochelle, New York. So New Rochelle is in Westchester County. So it's, I think it's about 45 minutes from where I used to live. So that appealed to me. I said, this is interesting. We started going out. The next thing you know, we started to go out and we dated for a while, and then we became close. And he, so while I was going to college at Nassau, he said, well, why don't you, because he was impressed with my credentials and everything. So he said, well, why don't you explore working with me? And I said, okay. So that happened. And then the next thing you know, I moved out of my uncle's house and I moved in with him. So I actually moved into his 37-foot yacht, which was a Carver Mariner. And he had an office in, at that time, the Pelham Parkway section of the Bronx. We started living together and things were fine and everything. And then we became closer and closer, and I was, feeling good vibes from him. And he would send me out on the road to close sales in New York City. So we were making 6-figure income, and people thought that we were the Hollywood couple. So we decided to get married, but we did not do it the traditional way, which is, my big fat Greek wedding. We bought a house. We were looking to buy a house in the Hudson Valley in New York State, which is Rhinebeck, New York, which is 2 hours north of New York City. So we finally bought a house in the development, and we decided that we were going to pack up and leave New York and move to the Hudson Valley. So we still kept our business in New York, meaning we still kept our house in the city, and we rented 2/3 of the house, and then we kept a studio apartment for ourselves. And then we got married at the Justice of the Peace. So during this time, he didn't exhibit any, which I'm going to talk about next, but he didn't exhibit like any problems. I didn't feel that he had issues or anything. We were very close, and we worked together. We had worked together for, a long time. He didn't exhibit any control or manipulation at first. So, like he was really, really accommodating to me. But then that changed later on. So that is how we met. And then we bought the house in Rhinebeck, and then we were commuting to New York every couple of weeks. So we started to open up the Hudson Valley territory. And I was selling postcard direct mail advertising. I also took care of the production and the finances for the company. But then things started to happen, meaning that he started, whenever we would go out to a restaurant or we would go out, I would dress up to look really well. And he was very, very, in public, he was very nice to me. But then when we got home, he was not so nice to me. So he exhibited, because we were also, I don't think I said this before, we were 19 years apart. So we got married. I was 25 and I think he was 44. So I remember, not early on, but later on, after the marriage, after we got married and, things, we settled in, then he started to display anger and he started to display jealousy. So whenever I would go out on the road or whenever I would go meet a client, he would check my phone. He would check to see how many calls I was making. And that concerned me a little bit. So why would you want to check my phone? And then, he would start to admonish me and just say that you're not doing the work right. You're not doing this right. You're not doing that right. So not good enough, blah, blah, blah. So then I just said, okay, what can we do to make this work? Because I was always the one who wanted to make it work.
Wait. Let's stop and pause. Angeline, that's a lot.
I know.
That was a huge amount. Claire and I are probably going to go back and forth and ask a bunch of questions. My first one to you is, you said there were no warning signs. You're 19 years apart in age. That wasn't,
Correct.
Was that not a warning sign?
Not for me at the time, no.
Okay, just asking, some people would say wow, that's a lot of years, but why did you say that's not a lot of years?
I don't know, because that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably very naive at the time.
Yeah, but there must have been something about him that made you not even question years.
Right. Well, he was very good at making a good impression. And making a good impression on me, making a good impression in public, being secure. He was financially secure. He had his own business. So I was probably drawn to that. And I didn't see it's sort of like you're being blindsided. So
if I can interrupt too, having an age gap isn't necessarily a warning sign. I mean, you can have a perfectly fine relationship.
Yeah, I agree with you
Right.
wholeheartedly, Claire. But I think one interesting thing is, I was wondering, I was going to tie it back to culturally, Angeline, one's understanding of what's normative or acceptable. To me, there's two parts of it. I would say, Claire and Angeline. One, to me, there's three things I would take into thought. Just me. One is what I knew in my small circle. Do I have any grandparents or aunts and uncles who are disparate in age? Almost 20 years. That's, if I've seen it be done well, I don't question it. Two is, beyond my small circle, if there are others in that circle who have, through my culture, my religion, we've interviewed people who have been in almost internment camps, Angelina, Angeline, where they're held hostage. That's normative for them. So I think there's a small circle, there's the bigger cultural expectation, and then the largest final one is, if those two factors don't impede, distract, or influence my understanding what might be proper or not proper, because I'm rogue and I believe in my own brilliant self and I could choose anything I want. I'm so good at everything. I don't care how old someone is. They could be Hello, who was it who's 83 and has a 29-year-old wife and they just had a baby? Was it Al Pacino, I believe? Yeah, I think it was Al Pacino. Hello, Al Pacino. Like his wife is 60 years younger. Almost. No, 70. No, 50. Sorry. I'm just like flinging around decades. But what I would say, Angeline, there's also, maybe we say Al Pacino's wife flings it out the window. I just love and find this human to be my soulmate. So I only wanted to query back when you were making, because I know where the story is going to lead our listeners to and you to, is domestic violence. So I think it's really interesting the ways we get into relationships that there's no excuse for domestic violence. There's no one it doesn't matter your rationale. The whole premise of our podcast is there is no excuse for being abusive, and there's no reason that anyone should be a victim. But what we do on the podcast is think about all these, I'll say, parts of the casserole that create vulnerability, strength, weaknesses, insights. Like it's thinking through the process. And what you're doing, Angeline, is thank you for sharing everything you did so far. But now we're kind of thinking with our listeners who will resonate with you. We had a guest recently who was, I think he was 14 and dating a 24-year-old in college. Now, you weren't a minor, you were an adult. But here's a 14-year-old dating a 24-year-old, and he was in love with this abuser to be. So I think it's really interesting to explore every part of the questioning of like where we went and how we got there. So not just the end journey and not just what your mission and vision is going forward, which I know is huge and we'll get there of what you're doing with your life now. But I think we have to explain to our listeners and dive in deeply. I don't care about 19 years, but I'm curious what part of you was like, I'm bold, I'm brazen. He's so cool. He's a great seller. He sold me. We are he probably was like, I'm envisioning you are the powerhouse. I'm making 6 figures. I left Minnesota. I dropped out of St. Thomas. I'm this cool. Like, hello me. I partly think it was hello me. I am that good. And I partnered with someone who's really cool, suave, debonair, and convincing and thoughtful and brilliant. And I sometimes think the mind, if he was really smart, can be more enticing than any other aspect of a human. But I would love to hear that part of your analysis. Like when you went into this marriage and you two were buying this house, part of it, was it just momentum from the business? Or do you think it was also, I don't know. I just gave you a ton of things to think about. You can tell me anything. Or you can say, Katie, you are all wrong on all fronts. I delete A, B, and C. The answer is D.
Right. Okay.
I'm open to all the answers. I'm just trying to think. And I think it's really interesting because you're clearly accomplished and brilliant and thoughtful. And I think the diagnoses of how you came to it and thinking it through and is really fascinating to me. And I think to our listeners.
Thank you. And Katie, you brought up a lot of good points here. Wow. I'm like, totally.
B and C and go to D.
Yeah, we'll just go to D. You know what I feel it was? I feel it was just momentum, that we had this huge momentum.
Was there any part of it that was it mostly intellectual? Was it mostly like experiential? Was it also sexual, like romantic? Was it like all of the above?
I would say not all of the above. I would say intellectual because we made an investment. I would say probably some sexual. I would say that. And what was the other one? It was probably those two.
Okay, sexual, and you said like business building momentum.
Correct.
And you two thought like you were both smart, and you loved each other's brains, probably.
Yeah,
right.
You probably thought you made a great team.
Yeah, you're bonding and
right.
Hello,
right.
You're not robbing anything, but you're taking on the world. Okay.
Exactly. We were taking on the world.
I know, you're Bonnie and Clyde. I'm already like imagining you in the outfit with the car and the shotgun or whatever they had. I don't know what they had, but it must have been like, I imagine that part of your relationship, because I know we're going to get to the demise and the harm, but that part of the, I would say, crescendo before the diminuendo, but I would not even say it that well. It's like the crash of abuse. Like what was the crescendo? How did it feel like to you? Was it exhilarating? Was it every day was a new adventure? Like I'm feeling you were in the Pandora's box of relationship.
Yes, it was exhilarating. And it was like we were on top of the world. And actually, people told us, you ready for this? Clients would tell us that you are the Hollywood couple.
Wow. Angelina, I've been listening very carefully, and I'm now getting the picture. But I'm sorry, I'm putting in our podcast my words the way I would paint the picture. I'm hearing it and believing it. I mean, hello, our listeners have not seen your gorgeous face, but you always Google you and find you. And I imagine that it was a total concert of a life at that point.
And if I could say, I'll bet also it's part of the Hollywood couple because he was an older, suave man and you were a beautiful young woman. I mean, if it was reversed, they wouldn't be saying that. I think it's just you were a success, right?
Hello,
right?
ageism. Only Demi Moore. There's only been Demi Moore and no one else, right?
Exactly. Here he has this young, beautiful woman, and he's carrying himself, like he's the smartest businessman in the world. But, clients told us, we did business with a client. They're not in business anymore, but it's a Placido Domingo restaurant. So every time that we would go to take care of business, we would have lunch. And like the waiters, they were like, oh my goodness. And the staff, they're like, you two belong in Hollywood. I was like,
wow. So you kind of, if when things started to go awry, I could imagine that you become part of this, something that's beyond you. So it's very hard to extricate yourself, I would think.
Right. I love, Claire, can I just compliment you? I think that's really brilliant that you said it that way, because sometimes the more I would say, like, I think of it this way, Claire and, Angeline, I think that we're like marionettes. The more strings and body parts they have attached to strings, those people with power over us are able to micromanage and make us feel like if one is cut, they get to choose which one is cut. And we don't know if it's going to be the one to our heart, our brain, our like little pinky finger. But each part of our body is so important and critical to us that even, especially, those of us who want to be exploratory with all of our talents, probably like you, Angeline, I'm just thinking you're so multifaceted and we've not even talked about all your gifts, but I'm thinking like now I'm thinking about domestic violence in a very different way. And it's being able to one, have the power of the puppeteer, and second, having attached as many strings as possible. And the genius of the abuser is attaching the string to our Achilles heel.
Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what does that statement I just made mean to you? Because I just made it up on the spot, Angeline.
Wow, you just made it up on the spot.
I totally did. I never said that before in my life. That was just me thinking with you and listening very clearly. But I'm not thinking the same thing as you, but I'm listening very carefully to what you're telling me.
Right. Like when you said that he basically touched my Achilles heel, you're right.
Which was, what would you say he knew he could get? And how long did it take him to get the string on your Achilles heel?
You know what? I don't exactly recall how long, but I think I recall like when we moved upstate and then we would, go to New York City. I think he figured that I basically would do what he wanted. It started to remind me of
that's
my dad.
No, Angeline, think back. Think about, I want you to, this is hard, but this would be more helpful. And you can take a pause, but I really want you to think about a moment of physical experience, a word he said, a moment you interacted in front of other people. And almost my brain is saying maybe it was something that he did in front of other people, a way he spoke about you. I don't know. I'm just trying to go through your whole Rolodex. I know the word Rolodex. Most people don't. Claire and I do. And I bet you do. But, it's like the Rolodex of the brain. If you can thumb through all the pages, there must have been a couple things. And there might have been one thing that made you go like, okay, can you think of any of those experiences? Because I think that's really interesting for our listeners, if you can dig deep into those.
Sure. Well, in public, let me just answer the first question. Okay. So in public, he would praise me. He would compliment me. He would compliment me on the way I dress, on the way I look, my makeup, everything, the hair, the whole shebang, and the way I carried myself. But in private, it was different. So because so many people were drawn to me, including guys, he became jealous and resentful. And, we were like, like with friends, I had to be with his friends. Okay. Let's put it that way. And, they all liked me and everything, but he was starting to get jealous and resentful of that. And then number two, when I would go out and go shopping, or I would go out and take care of, the house and everything, that he would call up and check up on me to see where I was.
Angelina, I have another question though. That's interesting. That's money, money, money. Hello, 6-figure couple. And you're probably thinking that I'm bringing in at least half, or did you ever think you were less than him? Or did you start to think I'm the key to our success? Like, how was your perception of the money part of your relationship?
That's a good question. So the money part was, I felt I brought in the money. I would say I brought in about, I would say half of the money.
Or more than half?
From sales. More than half. I would say more than half. Correct. Yeah, I would bring in more than half of the money.
Okay, then here's wait. Another quick question.
Sure.
I love that you went shopping, because here's the thing. You earned the darn money, but he must have thought I created the Angeline who could make the money. Therefore, you are my marionette that he would only think you could spend the money because I made you and you're still my marionette, and you only get to spend it to either the extent that I want or on things that I approve of. I don't know. What do you think? Wrong? You can again say no if the answer is D.
Yeah, probably.
well, just tell me what you think, because I think that's really interesting, because you have a unique relationship, because you're clearly talented, but if you two didn't have a personal relationship, this money would have been all yours.
Exactly.
And then you could go shopping anytime.
Right, exactly. I could go to Bloomingdale's.
The alternate reality right now is, but for this intimate partnership sex thing, marriage thing, you could have done it all by yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. And I actually have a question. You say he would check your phone. Did he check the car's odometer to see how many miles you'd driven?
You know what? I don't recall that he did. No, not the odometer. No.
Okay.
No.
So he checked up on you through your phone. And is there any other way? Did he call you at sort of random times? You said he was kind of getting jealous.
Right. He was getting jealous. What happened was that he decided to semi-retire from his business. So I went out to work in corporate America. So I wanted to elevate myself to the next level, and I wanted to meet other people besides being stuck in the house working with him. So, he semi-retired, and I said, I'm just going to go out to work. So he was fine with it at first, but what I meant was by checking the phone, I was doing direct sales. So I was working for Fortune 500 companies, big corporations, in sales. And so when I would make calls from my cell phone, he would check my cell phone bill. So I felt uncomfortable with that. And then sometimes I would call some of my colleagues to talk and strategize. There was nothing romantic at all. These were all business calls. And, I just felt demeaned, because when he would check the cell phone bill and he would ask me about it, I would say, well, these are all business calls. And I was just reaching the point where at that time, that I wanted a better life for myself. And then he started to there was verbal abuse. So because I was making most of the money, we had separate accounts, and we had one account, for both of us. But then I had my own separate account, and he didn't want it that way. But I didn't want to give him, my account information, because I was afraid that he was going to just steal the money from me. Yeah. And also with the credit cards, I made a mistake with the credit cards though. So with the credit cards, they were in both names. And what he would do is he would write out checks, balance transfer checks of $10,000, $20,000 and so forth to purchase mutual funds. So he was actually co-managing mingling funds, and it went against my credit. Because guess what? When I was ready to file for divorce, my credit was really bad because I was thrown into debt, and, I had financial abuse. There was classic example. I wasn't allowed to visit my parents. So there was a period of time for about 15 years where I didn't even go visit my parents. I would talk on the phone, and that was like years lost. I can't take those back now, but, so he just gradually changed for the worse. He gradually changed for the worse. And we also lost over $100,000 in a mutual fund in 2008 when the market crashed. So when the stock market crashed, mutual funds, everything crashed. So it was a downward spiral. And then physical abuse happened. He threw me against the wall one night. I was lying in bed. I was crying. I was, he was like verbally abusing me and accusing me of being reckless on finances and whatever. And I said, well, I'm just going to go into the next room, but I didn't make it into the next room. He came, I heard him, and I'm like, uh-oh. So I was wearing my robe, and it was late at night, and he grabbed me by the neck from behind, and he threw me against the wall near the bathroom, and I fell backwards. And I ended up with a broken nose. And guess what? I was bleeding. So there was blood all over the place, and my face was bruised, and my nose was broken, and I was crying even more. And I just looked up. I said, God, please save me. I said, I don't want to die. And I feel very grateful to be alive today. When I share, and I'm being very, very vulnerable right now. So when I share that part of my story where I was bleeding and just everything was just like, so ironically, he took me to the emergency room, which is not unusual, for the abuser to do, to make them look good. But I was afraid to tell the authorities that he abused me. I just basically said I fell down the stairs because we had a 2-floor house. So there was a lot of fear, and it took me a long time, to realize that, what, this is just not for me anymore. I said, I'm making a name for myself. And I said, I don't want to be dragged down to the mud with him and be no longer victimized. So a lot of people ask me, so how did you finally, realize it, and I realized it in 2010 of May that I decided to file for divorce. I had gone to an attorney, a high-powered attorney in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I just said, I drew a line in the sand. I had to take ownership and take responsibility for my actions. I surrendered my pride and ego. And I remember driving to the office and writing her a check for $5,000 to start the proceedings. Mm-hmm. And that was my own money. So I went into huge debt. And after that, when we went to court, I was exploring Saratoga Springs. And this was a city that I had visited myself 10 years prior because I would go to events and stuff, for work. So for, my previous employers. So that's how I landed Skidmore College as a client. But anyways, I made a 1-year plan that I was going to move to Saratoga Springs. So after court, jumped in the car and I drove up here. And I made a plan because my suitcase was already packed. Everything was packed. And I had the support and cooperation from the New York State Police and the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office, which is in Dutchess County, New York, where I used to live. So I had full support, and I was going to a therapist for a little over a year. And, I realized when I came up here for that weekend that I said, and I only knew like 3 people out of this whole city because the population now was like 40,000 or more. But I only knew 3 people, and that didn't bother me. All I had was a plan and a vision to move. And so I was basically, living like a gypsy for 1 year, even though I had a protective order. There's different levels of protective orders in New York State. So I had a limited protective order. So I was still able to stay in the house, but I stayed on the 2nd floor and he stayed on the 1st floor, and he was going for therapy too. But then it was determined that he had bipolar disorder. So yeah, so that was like a real bad time for me. I was sitting on eggshells. I mean, I remember, staying in people's houses. People opened up their houses to me, close friends. And, sometimes I would have to stay in a motel room for the night. And it was just really, but like I said, I made a plan. I would go to the New York Public Library. So not the New York Public Library, but the local public library in Rhinebeck. So I did a lot of research, got educated on, domestic violence. And I also decided to get involved in the online space on Facebook. So meaning, online, there's, different people do affiliate marketing or network marketing. So I became involved with the health and wellness company that changed my life. And I decided to pursue it because number one, I wanted to get healthy and get better and put myself in a better position mentally. So I invested in courses, I invested in personal development, and I invested in myself and surrounded myself with people who were speaking life into me, leaders, mentors, coaches who believed in me. And, they saw what I was going through. They knew exactly what I was going through. And because I had to go to court several times and that wasn't pleasant. But after a year, on April 30th, 2011, I packed my bags and we were reaching a settlement because finally he woke up and decided to settle after giving me a hard time for 1 year. And I moved to Saratoga Springs with 2 suitcases and old furniture from the house. And then, later on, once I received my settlement, which was about a month and a half later, I invested again in myself. I bought new furniture and I was starting to travel. So that was truly life-changing for me. And I've always had a passion for helping people, but I did share my story like in bits and pieces online. But then, I was working, in the corporate America space again. So I left that company and that company changed my life. In fact, the same day I signed my divorce papers was the same day that I rank advanced in the company. So that was a huge breakthrough for me. And I traveled to Los Angeles for the first time, to their conference. And it was a summit and had a really great time, met leaders, and we're still connected today, on social media. The power of social media is amazing to be able to connect with like-minded people. And, while I was still working in corporate America, I had a longing to help women find their voice and to help women to overcome domestic violence, the women who are struggling today. So 4 years ago, right before COVID hit, I decided to start my podcast and I came up with the name, Let's Break the Silence with Angeline. And that is my domain name. I own that name. I purchased the domain name. And because I wanted to break the silence on domestic violence.
Okay, let me stop you right here because I want to hear more about this and
Sure.
podcast. But let's go back for a moment. Most people, when they are in a situation where there's domestic violence, even with a limited protective order, couldn't possibly coexist in the same house as their abuser because it just wouldn't work, right? So how did you say you were kind of walking on eggshells a lot of the time. What kind of impact did that have on you, living there? I guess you didn't have much option probably. And was there anything in New York law? Because, some people say some laws in some states where if one person moves out of the home, they've kind of abandoned the home or it affects, was that part of the factor here?
That was part of the factor. I did research and my lawyer researched it too, because I was actually looking for a small apartment so I could stay, but it just wasn't possible. My lawyer said, don't try it because they'll consider it abandonment. That's a good question. And in New York State, I think if you leave right away, they consider that abandonment. So I hate to say this word, but I sort of just played the game and I did whatever because you have to. And, so I didn't feel stuck. I recognized it. And I said, okay, I can't move right now because like I said, I had a realtor who was looking for a place for me. And it just wasn't possible. So I told her, don't waste your time anymore because the court, it's just not going to work. That was because, I could not leave because of abandonment, but I was allowed to go out and stay in someone's house. If, they invited me, I could temporarily. So I was very, very careful in that regard.
And you say he was moving money around and he was moving your money out. When did you discover this? When you were going through the discovery period of the divorce or when? Because a lot of people, I've spoken to a number of women who they think they have money, even if it's a joint account, they know what they know. And then they discover when all the finances have to be exposed, right? During a divorce hearing. that there's no money there. And all the money is in an account that only he has his name on. So there's no way to access that money. I'm just wondering if that's sort of what you were finding.
That's exactly what you said. Yes, that's what I was finding. Actually, it was right before I think I filed for divorce. It was about a month before. I found out that he was moving money because I went to the bank. I wanted to charge something. I went to Walmart or wherever I went to charge something, and it didn't go through. And my heart just sank. I said, oh my God, what? So he took out the money. Yeah. And I was just I was devastated. I said, now what do I do? But then, so I was collecting unemployment at the time because I had lost my corporate job. So the police, I recall, first they told me, change your phone number, number one. And number two, just open up a separate bank account. Just a check, just simple. Just make it simple. And you have all your funds transferred. So that's what I did. I didn't keep it in the same bank. I took it out. But it was like not that much because he took most of it out. So, and it was hard for me to look for work. So the court granted me alimony. So my ex had to pay alimony to me, monthly alimony payments every month. But that was tough to live on. And that would be impossible to live on today, given, costs, living costs have gone up. So, but I knew that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Hope that answers your question.
Quick third question, and that is, you said you had the support of the police. Just describe one way they supported you. They obviously knew what they were talking about in terms of opening up a bank account. A lot of people in these situations don't feel they have the support of their law enforcement agency. What other ways did you feel that they were supporting you?
Well, the sergeant of the New York State Police Department actually knew both of us, but he knew, I think he picked up on the fact that my ex was lying. So, I mean, I was the one, like, if there was an incident that happened at the house, I had to leave. And actually, that was a blessing. Some people will look at it as, why did you have to leave the house? But for me, it was a blessing to leave the house. So I had to make arrangements to stay someplace else. And, I remember during my travel days, I would accumulate points on a Hilton card, or, I had some stuff that was put away, so he didn't know about it. So I would stay either in a hotel or I would stay in a friend's house for 3 days because like he would spit on the floor and he would just do all kinds of crazy things and start yelling for no reason. And I remember one time he woke me up at 5:00 in the morning. I was sleeping upstairs. He pounded on the door and I was in shock. I'm like, what is going on? And I just made sure that I didn't give in to his temper tantrums. So, I just made sure that I didn't feed into it. So when I called the police at 7:00 in the morning, this was on a summer morning. And actually this was the day that I was leaving for Saratoga for the weekend. So I told the officer where I was going. I said, I'm going here and I'm staying here and I'm not coming back until Tuesday. So he said, okay, just go. And then they told him to stay away. They told him just leave her alone and let her do her thing. And also with support, my ex had written letters this is what I found out from the sergeant of the New York State Police Department. To my recall, my ex would write letters to the New York State Police basically admonishing me and putting me down. And he told them that I was no good, I was psychotic, and this and that, where in fact he was psychotic, that everything was all my fault, but they didn't believe him at all. No, I'm glad they didn't believe him. I'm glad that they didn't. I was very fortunate. In fact, I had gone to visit my first cousins and their family for, I think it was about a week and a half out on Long Island in Merrick. And I remember, that was, a tough period, but my cousin was there to support me, to give me encouragement. And I remember driving back to upstate New York, and that was the time, I'm just trying to think. I remember the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office called me. They said, before you go to the house, we want to speak with you. I said, okay. So we met at a local mart, like a Stewart's. They have Stewart's here in New York. So we met at a gas station, actually. And they just told me, do not rescind the protective order. They warned me, just outlined steps that I needed to take. And, he's going to apologize. He's going to do this. He's going to say, I'm sorry. He didn't mean to do it. He's going to try to convince you to rescind the protective order. But I didn't give in to that. And I actually, when I got home, he was like, oh, everything's going to be fine. And he was trying to hug me and everything. And then I found the letter on the floor that he wrote to the police. So I just was like, I come home to this.
Actually, I think we went through a ton, and I'm worried we've overstayed our welcome for our listeners too. No,
Oh, okay.
Your story is vastly interesting and complex, Angeline, but we really try and be mindful for our listeners' time as well. So I think it would be great to wrap up the whole thing with just one closing comment from you, and then Claire can do our wrap up with our listeners.
Okay, so the message is that I would like to share is never give up. There is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. So stand your ground. And if you're in a situation where you feel that you are suffering from domestic violence, it's just time. You just have to draw a line in the sand, and you just have to say to yourself, you have to ask yourself, do you want to be in this situation for the rest of your life, or do you want to make a name for yourself like I did? And I was able to find my own true identity. So my advice is don't get frustrated. There is hope. As long as you are working on yourself and bettering yourself, and you want a better life for yourself, you will reach that point. And it may take 6 months. It may take a year. Now, in my case, mine was 1 year. It was a 1-year transition period. It took 1 year for me to finally get myself out of the hole. And, so my advice is invest in yourself.
Thank you. We were all taking notes, Angeline. That was wonderful. And we will put a link to your podcast and how they can learn about more about you. Claire, please go ahead and tell our listeners where to find more resources.
So thank you, Angeline, for your amazing story and for sharing all you went through. I'm sure that our listeners will learn a lot from that. And also, thank you to our wonderful volunteers who make this podcast possible. It's not just Katie and me. We couldn't do it without them. And thank you to all of our listeners who are here to hear Angeline's story and to perhaps take some steps after this. Help us help other survivors too by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it far and wide on your social media, and please follow us on our Facebook page and Instagram page. If you need support but don't know where to find it, if you go to takebackthenight.org, you'll find a list of resources and how to reach our legal support hotline. And remember also, self-care is essential to healing and thriving.
Thank you so much, Claire. And again, thank you back to you, Angeline. And we will definitely tell our listeners more about you and your story through your podcast. And again, for our listeners, please continue to join us. We all have different experiences and different ways of thinking about it and growing and healing. And Angeline's story was certainly empowering. So we absolutely look forward to next steps. Join us again. Take care, everyone. And next time we'll talk again.
Take care, all.
Take care, everyone.